Well, I couldn't wait to walk in my old man's shoes, and what more could I ask? To head off with my biscuit tin, black tea and a thermos flask, to learn to plough a real straight line, to learn to be alone, in ever-diminishing circles, solve problems on my own. Now, it's considered normal to pass your acres down, but if you got more children, well, you try to buy more ground, so you borrow heaps of money just to give your kids a go. After all that's said and done, you taught them all you know. Chapter 6. To walk in my old man's shoes. I guess I was a boy to Dad until he noticed one day there was a young man in a blue singlet standing in front of him. I remember him saying to Mum, "John's become a man, eh?" I guess I was about 19, but I must admit I was still pretty naive at that age. Dad never said out loud that he loved us boys, but we felt it. When I had my own car, he would sometimes sneak off and fuel it up. It was probably his excuse to give it a run. The new way of life in northwest New South Wales was what we all needed in many ways. It certainly provided plenty of new opportunities for me now I'd finished school, including the gift of my first car, a brand new EH Holden Ute. I found studying at secondary school level really hard and failed matriculation miserably. The move gave Mum the opportunity to think about her next dream home. The old weatherboard house on our property tralee was lined on the inside only. The stud walls were exposed but surrounded by a gauze-in veranda. Attached to the original little building was a huge breezeway, big enough for the large billiard table that came with the purchase of the property. The original kitchen was a scullery where the housekeeping and cooking were done out of sight of the man in the house. It had a separate walk-in pantry for preserves. In 1965, the state power hadn't reached our area, so outside all of that was the power generator with a bank of batteries. The more modern kitchen had probably been added in the 50s. Initially, there was plenty of room for Will and me to have our own bedrooms. Pete and Rob were still in boarding school, and I can't remember where 6-year-old Jeff slept. By today's standards, it was pretty basic, but Mum knew she would eventually have a new home to match up what she had in Quamby. I was finally comfortable in my Aussie rules position at halfback in Quambatook when I found myself in the land of rugby union and rugby league. No Aussie rules, no girlfriend, no mates. What did I do? I learned to play rugby union. Or should I say, I had a go at playing rugby. I eventually made fullback with the Maori All Blacks, now called the Wee Bolla Bolla Bulls. I got by because I could catch and kick, but I never really learnt the science of rugby. No one taught me how to sidestep or how to tackle. My specialty was to up and under. That is, after catching the ball as fullback, I'd kick the ball high enough to reach it before it landed. Unfortunately, usually some no-neck from the opposition had other ideas and would shoulder me out of the way before I got there. I'm sure I probably up and undered too much. I did run with the ball on occasions. After one such attempt, I woke up in the middle of the football ground not knowing where I was. Suddenly the day was completely overexposed and someone's head had knocked my teeth through my cheek. I was actually knocked silly. A saying I now know is real. I was carted off to Moree Hospital and checked out by the doctor, to whom I made the most ridiculous drunken-like statements. My girlfriend at the time visited me briefly to see my face blown up like a dead cane toad's, and she quietly snuck back to the rugby after party. I was never quite right for her. I wasn't what you'd call the landed gentry type. I still have a wire in my right shoulder to remind me of my rugby days. When we first moved, I took on milking a cow, but gave that away quite quickly as I had no patience with an Ayrshire that had horns and an accurate kick. I tried tying her hind leg down, but then she found a way to put her front leg in the milk bucket. She really was not amused at me stealing her calf's milk, but was quite willing to eat the oats I gave her. I had more success with pigs. There are 2 ways to make money out of pigs. Go big by buying food as well as building a proper sty for them with concrete floors in a shed, or keep it really small with lower overheads. I chose the latter and it was fun. A 12-month-old pig was bringing about $100 back in the 60s. Good beer money. So I cut 2 large Bellatri poles and dragged and pushed them with the tractor until they were under the old foundations of the corrugated iron shearers' quarters. Then I managed to tow the 5 rooms of the quarters to the back of the homestead and turned the whole thing into a pigsty. I built 5 small steel mesh yards outside each door, and I had a home for 5 sows. They usually gave birth to at least 6 piglets. I had a landrace boar that did the job for breeding purposes, but he was very shy, and I never caught him in the act. The bonus was we had quite a lot of scrap wheat at the end of harvest to feed them. I just added blood and bone from the abattoirs at Moree. As the piglets grew, I let them out into a paddock surrounded by an electric fence. The pigs are quite intelligent, and they have eyes just like us. I learned never to look a pig in the eye if it was to be yarded. It would know straight away what was going to happen if you looked at it, and would avoid coming anywhere near the yard. The year we moved to Tralee, we suffered the worst drought in recorded history. We had bought about 2,000 sheep because we hadn't cleared all the scrub at the time. Those sheep were eventually sold for 1 6p, skin value. This was after we had 2 stockmen take them around the stock routes in Queensland for months. By the time the sheep returned, they were very poorly and many died. I don't have fond memories of sheep farming. Dad had invited Jim Hanson and his family to move from Quambatook with us. Jim was like a big brother to me. Back in the Mallee, he taught me a lot once I was old enough to drive a tractor. Jim was still Dad's right-hand man when we moved, and there was much more to be done. So right next door, Dad built a small house for Jim. Now, it seems like a strange decision to build so close, but I guess it was to share the water tank that was filled by a windmill. I suppose Dad also thought it would be easier to connect the electricity when the power eventually arrived. It must have been a bit hard for Jim to see me, a first-year farmer when we moved, gradually become a manager. Dad slowly handed me the reins on Tralee, and not long after, Jim took his family to Western Australia. After a few years, we bought nearby Backspear, about 10 kilometres north, but situated on the same Cropper Creek. Drought struck again. Backspear had been a beautiful sheep breeding property, but we'd paid wheat farming prices and couldn't really survive on growing wool. The crows didn't help the situation. They were often caught picking out the eyes of lambs as they were being born. The ewe at that moment is unable to fend them off. When we bought Backspear, most of it was not under the plough, and the man we employed to take care of the sheep used a horse. The young pony they gave me to ride knew straight away, of course, that he had a novice on his back. He was the boss. He would fight me heading away from the house, and then I had to stop him galloping all the way back. We bought an agricultural Honda bike soon after. I'm glad I gave the horse away. There have been some tragic accidents on the bloody things. Mum was right all along. When Mum and Dad moved to Backspear, Tralee became my property to run, and Will and I jointly owned it. Although Tralee and Backspear were separately owned, the 2 properties were still within the farming partnership. By law in New South Wales, Mum and Dad weren't allowed to own more than 1 property. So as we expanded, Peter became the owner of another place called Nini, and still is to this day, and Robin owned another property called Gilgil. K and S.E. Williamson and Sons ended up with about 14,000 acres of prime wheat country between Moree and Gundawindi. All these expansion rules are a joke now, as foreign corporates are buying up huge tracts of wheat farming land purely as investments, sometimes not even farming them, but just holding on to them. Our best year ever was in the late 60s when we harvested 10,000 acres and produced 10,000 tonnes of wheat, most of which we harvested with our own headers and carted with our own trucks. Summer rain was the norm, and we soon learned not to muck around up there. Sundays off at harvest time was unheard of in northwest New South Wales. We'd harvest into the night, even if we left some grain behind, just to get the crop off before the storms arrived. In the Mallee, we rarely harvested once the air became moist in the evening. With the purchase of the beautiful Baxbeer, at last Mum's dream of having another new home was possible. This time she renovated by hiring a dreadful Cape Cod conversion mob from Sydney. She had the house made into a 2-storey home with a roof designed traditionally for snow country. It was most inappropriate and extremely hot upstairs. However, downstairs it had her trademark kitchen, living room and dining room, all attached to the carport and garden. It was a welcoming sight to come home to. A swimming pool was included, and boy was it a bonus in the summer. Like both our houses in Quamby, this one also has a visitor's room, rarely used, so we called it Ma's room. It was pink and white with awful mock Regency period furniture. You can imagine the impact Mum made on the farming community in the northwest of New South Wales. We had barely been there 5 years when she became a founder of Taluna Ladies Club, and the musical concerts began again. Mum produced the Baxbeer Burr Cutters, a concert of skits and songs performed by locals. The show eventually became successful enough to put it on in Moree and would sell out over 4 nights. That was no mean feat in that town, I can assure you. But Mum knew the locals making fools of themselves on the stage was immensely entertaining to their neighbours and mates, and she had the backup of her own family. Willie made himself famous by miming Peter Allen's I Go to Rio with piano, maracas and a hairy paunch. Robin always liked the drums. Peter, Mum often said, has a better voice than I have. And Jeff, well, you never knew what he would come up with. His favourite singer was Frank Zappa.